The coffee shop in downtown Phoenix buzzed with the usual morning rush. Business people grabbing their caffeine fix. Students hunched over laptops, retirees reading newspapers. Staff Sergeant Samantha Reyes sat in the corner booth, her weathered hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, looking like any other veteran trying to blend into civilian life. Plain clothes, unremarkable appearance, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But across the crowded café, 3 men in dark jackets had been watching her for the past 20 minutes. Their eyes held a recognition that sent chills down spines, the kind of look that said they knew exactly who she was and why she was worth finding. One of them pulled out his phone and showed the screen to his companions. On it was a grainy photograph, a wanted poster with text in Arabic and English. The face in the photo matched the woman sipping coffee just 30 feet away. Samantha Reyes wasn't just another soldier. She was the soldier they'd been hunting for 3 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Parking garage beneath the Phoenix Veterans Affairs. Building smelled like motor oil and broken dreams. Samantha Reyes adjusted the strap of her worn messenger bag and walked toward the elevator with the measured pace of someone who'd learned that hurrying rarely solved anything important. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows. Between the concrete pillars where other veterans' cars sat like silent monuments to service that most civilians couldn't begin to understand. It was Tuesday, which meant her weekly appointment with Dr. Martinez, the VA counselor who'd been trying for 8 months to help her process her transition to civilian life. What Dr. Martinez didn't know, what nobody in this building knew, was that Samantha's transition had less to do with adjusting to peace and more to do with staying invisible long enough to stay alive. The elevator carried her to the 3rd floor, past the familiar maze of bureaucratic offices and waiting rooms filled with veterans of every conflict, from Vietnam to Afghanistan. Some wore their service on their sleeves with pride. Military caps, unit patches, the easy camaraderie that came from shared experience. Others, like Samantha, had learned that sometimes the best way to honor your service was to make sure nobody knew exactly what that service had entailed. She signed in at the reception desk with the same signature she'd been practicing for 2 years. Neat, unremarkable, belonging to someone named Sarah Reynolds, who existed only on paper and in government databases that had been carefully scrubbed of anything interesting. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Carol, who always wore too much perfume and spoke in the overly cheerful tone of someone who dealt with broken people all day, barely looked up from her computer screen. Dr. Martinez is running about 10 minutes behind, Carol said, handing Samantha a clipboard with forms she'd filled out dozens of times before. Same questions as always, just routine updates. Samantha took the clipboard and found a seat in the waiting room, surrounded by the quiet desperation that seemed to permeate every VA facility she'd ever visited. The man next to her was missing his left arm and stared at a magazine without turning the pages. Across the room, a young woman in her early 20s rocked slightly in her chair, her eyes holding the 1,000-yard stare that Samantha recognized from her own mirror on the bad days. The forms asked the same questions they always asked. How are you sleeping? Any thoughts of self-harm? Rate your anxiety level on a scale of 1 to 10. Are you experiencing any flashbacks or intrusive memories related to your military service? Samantha filled them out with the same carefully crafted responses she'd memorized. Months ago, sleeping fine, no thoughts of self-harm. Anxiety level, manageable. No flashbacks worth mentioning. What the forms didn't ask, what they couldn't ask without raising red flags in databases that certain people monitored very carefully, was whether she'd killed anyone recently, whether she still checked her 6 every time she left a building, or whether she'd memorized the faces of every person who'd entered the coffee shop across the street during the 20 minutes she'd been sitting in this waiting room. Those were the kinds of questions that belonged to a different life. One that officially had never happened. Sarah Reynolds? Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway of his office, holding a file folder that contained 8 months of carefully constructed lies about a fictional veteran's struggle to adapt to civilian life. He was a good man, Dr. Martinez, genuinely cared about his patients, worked long hours for government pay, and believed that everyone deserved a chance to heal from whatever wounds their service had left them with. What he didn't know was that the woman he'd been counseling for the better part of a year wasn't actually named Sarah Reynolds, hadn't served in the conventional military units listed in her file, and wasn't struggling with adaptation so much as she was struggling with staying alive long enough to see her next birthday. Samantha followed him into his office, past the walls covered with certificates and motivational posters that probably worked for veterans whose biggest challenge was finding meaningful employment or dealing with the ordinary trauma of ordinary combat. Dr. Martinez's office was a sanctuary of neutral colors and soft lighting, designed to make people feel safe enough to talk about things they'd never told anyone else. "How are you feeling today, Sarah?" Dr. Martinez asked, settling into his chair with the practiced ease of someone who'd had this conversation thousands of times with hundreds of different veterans. "You look tired." Samantha had been tired for 3 years, ever since the operation in Syria, that had officially never happened, but had resulted in her face being distributed on wanted posters throughout half the Middle East. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix, that came from knowing that the wrong person recognizing you at the wrong time could result in consequences that extended far beyond personal inconvenience. "Just the usual adjustment issues," she said, using the therapeutic language that Dr. Martinez preferred. "Some trouble sleeping, occasional anxiety about civilian work situations. Nothing that seems to be getting worse." Dr. Martinez made notes in her file, his pen scratching across paper with the soft sound of documentation that would become part of a permanent record that certain people took great interest in maintaining. What he wrote down would be filed away in government databases, cross-referenced with other information, and monitored by algorithms designed to flag unusual patterns or concerning behaviors. What he didn't write down was that Sarah Reynolds had paid for her coffee that morning with cash, had chosen a seat that provided clear sightlines to all entrances and exits, and had noticed the 3 men in dark jackets who'd been watching her with the kind of focused attention that suggested they weren't just admiring the scenery. "Have you given any more thought to the job training programs we discussed?" Dr. Martinez asked, consulting his notes from their previous sessions. "The medical technician certification program starts next month, and with your background in field medicine, you'd be a natural fit." Samantha's background in field medicine was considerably more extensive than her official records indicated. While her VA file showed service as a standard Army medic with deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, the reality was that Staff Sergeant Samantha Reyes had spent 5 years as part of a classified unit that operated in places American soldiers weren't supposed to be, doing things that American soldiers weren't supposed to do, saving lives and taking lives in equal measure depending on what the mission required. The medical technician program sounded peaceful, normal, the kind of career that Sarah Reynolds could build a quiet life around. It also sounded like the kind of public-facing job that would require extensive background checks, professional references, and the kind of visibility that made staying invisible considerably more difficult. "I'm still considering my options," Samantha said carefully. "I want to make sure I'm ready for that level of responsibility before I commit to anything long-term." Dr. Martinez nodded with the understanding expression of someone who'd learned that pushing veterans too hard, too fast, often resulted in them disappearing from treatment altogether. What he didn't understand was that Samantha wasn't avoiding responsibility. She was managing a different kind of responsibility, the kind that came from knowing that 3 years ago, she'd killed 7 people in a single night and rescued and coached American journalist whose capture had never been reported in any newspaper. The journalist, Rebecca Chen, had been investigating arms trafficking routes through Syria when she'd been taken by a group that specialized in making Americans disappear permanently. The official response had been diplomatic protests and behind-the-scenes negotiations that everyone knew would result in nothing but delays and excuses. The unofficial response had been Samantha and her team conducting a night raid that had left the terrorist cell's leadership dead and Rebecca Chen alive to write stories that would win her a Pulitzer Prize for international reporting. What Rebecca Chen had never known, what she could never know, was that her rescue had been conducted by soldiers who officially didn't exist, using methods that officially weren't authorized, in an operation that had officially never happened. The mission had been a complete success by every measure that mattered. Rebecca Chen had returned home safely. The terrorist cell had been neutralized, and American interests had been protected without official American involvement. The only problem had been the security cameras. The terrorist compound had been more sophisticated than intelligence reports had indicated, with digital surveillance systems that had captured clear images of the American soldiers who'd conducted the raid. Those images had been uploaded to secure servers before Samantha's team had been able to destroy them, and within weeks, wanted posters bearing her photograph had begun appearing in markets and mosques throughout the region. The text on the posters was in Arabic, but the message was clear enough. The woman in the photograph was worth a significant amount of money to anyone who could provide information leading to her capture. Dead or alive, though the preference was clearly for alive so that she could be properly interrogated about American special operations, capabilities and methods. Samantha had been pulled out of active duty immediately, her unit disbanded, her records sanitized, and her identity officially transferred to a woman named Sarah Reynolds, who existed only in carefully maintained government databases. For the past 3 years, she'd been living the quiet life of a veteran seeking treatment for routine adjustment issues, attending weekly counseling sessions, and trying to build the kind of unremarkable existence that kept her off the radar of people who monitored international terrorist communications. "How are you sleeping?" Dr. Martinez asked, following the standard protocol for veteran mental health assessments. "Any recurring nightmares or intrusive thoughts about your military service?" Samantha's nightmares weren't about the people she'd killed. Those had been necessary, justified, the kind of decisions that saved American lives and protected American interests. Her nightmares were about the security cameras, about the moment when she'd realized that her face was now known to every terrorist network in the Middle East, about the understanding that her service to her country had made her a permanent target for people who specialized in making American soldiers disappear. "Occasional bad dreams," she said, which was technically true. "Nothing that interferes with daily functioning." Dr. Martinez made more notes, documenting the steady progress of a veteran who seemed to be adapting well to civilian life, despite the routine challenges that most former military personnel faced. What he couldn't document, what he couldn't even imagine, was that the woman sitting across from him had spent the morning conducting counter-surveillance techniques, had identified 3 possible threats in a coffee shop, and was currently calculating the fastest route out of the building. In case this appointment had been compromised, the session continued for another 30 minutes, covering the familiar territory of civilian job prospects, social connections, and long-term goals for integration into normal American life. Dr. Martinez was thorough, compassionate, and genuinely invested in helping his patients succeed in their transitions from military to civilian careers. When the session ended, Samantha shook his hand with the firm grip of someone who'd been trained to project confidence and stability, regardless of what was happening internally. She scheduled her next appointment with Carol at the reception desk, using the same pleasant, unremarkable demeanor that had served her well in maintaining her cover for the past 3 years. As she walked toward the elevator, Samantha's phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. "Coffee shop, now, come alone." The message deleted itself 3 seconds after she read it. Samantha's blood went cold as she realized that after 3 years of successfully staying invisible, someone had finally found her. And they wanted to talk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Phoenix sun hit Samantha like a physical blow as she stepped out of the Veterans Affairs building. But the heat wasn't what made her skin crawl with sudden awareness. Every instinct honed through 5 years of classified operations was screaming that something had fundamentally changed in the 12 minutes she'd spent in Dr. Martinez's office. The parking garage felt different now. Too quiet, too empty, with shadows that seemed deeper and more threatening than they had an hour ago. Samantha's hand instinctively moved toward her hip, where a Glock 19 would have been holstered during her operational years, but found only empty space beneath her civilian jacket. Sarah Reynolds didn't carry weapons. Sarah Reynolds was a struggling veteran trying to adapt to peaceful civilian life, but Samantha Reyes was still very much alive beneath that carefully constructed identity. And every combat instinct she possessed was telling her that the text message had changed everything. She reached her Honda Civic, chosen specifically for its ability to blend seamlessly into any parking lot in America, and conducted a quick visual inspection before approaching. No signs of tampering, no unusual objects placed near the vehicle, no indication that anyone had been interested in her transportation. The car was exactly as she'd left it, down to the small piece of tape she'd placed over the door handle that would show if anyone had tried to gain entry. Samantha started the engine and began driving toward the coffee shop with the measured calm of someone who'd learned that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her mind was already running through possibilities, contingencies, and escape routes while her hands maintained steady pressure on the steering wheel, and her eyes continuously scanned her mirrors for any sign of surveillance. The coffee shop on Central Avenue looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Same outdoor tables, same flow of customers, same unremarkable storefront that had made it an ideal location for her routine morning ritual. But now it felt like a trap waiting to be sprung, a carefully prepared stage, where someone wanted to have a conversation that couldn't happen through normal channels. Samantha parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, using the reflection in storefront windows to maintain visual contact with anyone who might be following her. The downtown Phoenix foot traffic provided excellent cover, enough people moving in all directions to mask her approach, but not so crowded that she couldn't identify potential threats or escape routes. She entered the coffee shop through the side entrance, immediately noting that the 3 men in dark jackets from earlier were no longer visible. Either they'd left, or they'd repositioned themselves in a way that suggested this meeting had been planned with considerably more sophistication than a random encounter. The barista behind the counter was different from the morning shift. A young man with elaborate tattoos covering both arms and the kind of disinterested expression that suggested he was more focused on his upcoming break than on memorizing customer faces. Samantha ordered a black coffee and found a table near the back of the shop that provided clear sight lines to all entrances, while keeping her back against a solid wall. She'd been sitting for exactly 4 minutes when a woman approached her table. Mid-30s, professional attire, carrying a leather briefcase that suggested legal or government work. Nothing about her appearance screamed danger, but Samantha had learned long ago that the most dangerous people were often the ones who looked the most normal. "Sarah Reynolds?" the woman asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" Samantha replied, maintaining the polite confusion of someone who genuinely didn't recognize the stranger addressing her. The woman sat down without being invited, placing her briefcase on the table with the controlled precision of someone accustomed to having her authority respected. "My name is Agent Lisa Morrison, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I believe you received a message suggesting we should meet." Agent Morrison reached into her briefcase and withdrew a manila folder, sliding it across the table toward Samantha. "Before you say anything, I want you to know that we're not here to arrest you. We're here because we need your help." Samantha looked at the folder without touching it, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. FBI involvement meant that her carefully maintained cover had been compromised at the highest levels of government. It also meant that whatever had prompted this meeting was significant enough to risk exposing an asset who'd been successfully hidden for 3 years. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Samantha said carefully. "I'm just a veteran trying to get my life back together after my service ended." Agent Morrison smiled with the practiced patience of someone who'd conducted hundreds of interrogations. "Staff Sergeant Samantha Elena Reyes, Army Special Operations Command, Task Force 121. 5 years of classified operations across Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Officially killed in action during a training exercise at Fort Bragg in November 2019. The coffee shop suddenly felt smaller, the ambient noise of other customers fading into background static as Samantha realized that her 3 years of careful invisibility had just ended with a single sentence. "The operation that compromised your identity," Agent Morrison continued, "wasn't just a rescue mission. The journalist you extracted, Rebecca Chun, had uncovered information about arms trafficking that goes far beyond what you reported in her Pulitzer Prize-winning series." Agent Morrison opened the folder and withdrew a series of photographs that made Samantha's blood run cold. They were surveillance images from the terrorist compound in Syria, not the grainy security camera footage that had ended up unwanted. Posters, but high-resolution photographs taken from multiple angles that showed Samantha's face with crystal clarity. "These images have been circulating through terrorist networks for the past 6 months, Agent Morrison said quietly. "Someone with significant resources has been distributing them along with updated intelligence about your current location and identity." Samantha studied the photographs without touching them, noting details that told a story she didn't want to hear. The images had been enhanced, digitally processed to improve clarity and provide facial recognition algorithms with the kind of detailed information that made hiding impossible. "Who has these?" Samantha asked, abandoning any pretense that she didn't know what Agent Morrison was talking about. "That's what we're trying to determine," Agent Morrison replied. "But what we do know is that 3 separate terrorist organizations have put bounties on your head in the past month. Not capture bounties, elimination bounties. Someone wants you dead badly enough to pay 7 figures for confirmation." The implications hit Samantha like a physical blow. For 3 years, she'd been hiding from people who wanted to capture and interrogate her. Now she was being hunted by people who simply wanted her eliminated, which meant that someone had decided she was more valuable dead than alive. "The journalist," Samantha said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Rebecca Chen. What did she really find?" Agent Morrison withdrew another document from the folder, a classified intelligence report marked with security classifications that Samantha recognized from her operational years. Chun didn't just uncover arms trafficking. She discovered evidence of American weapons being sold to terrorist organizations by someone inside the U.S. government. The coffee shop around them continued its normal rhythm of civilian life. Students typing on laptops, business meetings over lattes, the comfortable mundanity of people whose biggest concern was whether to extra phone to their order. But at their table, Samantha was learning that her rescue of Rebecca Chen had inadvertently exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American intelligence. Chun's investigation was getting close to identifying the source. Agent Morrison continued. "Someone with access to classified weapons shipments. Someone with the authority to redirect military supplies. Someone who's been selling American equipment to the same terrorist organizations we've been fighting for the past 2 decades. And they think I know who it is," Samantha said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. They think Chun told you something during the extraction, Agent Morrison confirmed. Something that could identify the source of the leaks. That's why the bounties have shifted from capture to elimination. They can't risk you talking to the wrong people. Samantha remembered the extraction clearly. Rebecca Chun had been barely conscious when they'd pulled her out of the terrorist compound, traumatized and dehydrated after 3 weeks in captivity. She'd mumbled incoherently during the helicopter flight to the extraction point, most of it incomprehensible fragments about her investigation and the arms trafficking network she'd been documenting. But there had been one moment, just before they'd reached the landing zone, when Chun had grabbed Samantha's arm with surprising strength and whispered something that had seemed like delirium at the time. Phoenix. The source is Phoenix. Tell them Phoenix knows everything. At the time, Samantha had assumed Chun was talking about the mythical bird, some metaphorical reference that made sense only in her traumatized state. But sitting in a coffee shop in Phoenix, Arizona, 3 years later, Samantha realized that Chun might have been providing her with information that could identify the source of the weapons leaks. Agent Morrison, Samantha said carefully, what exactly does the FBI want from Emmy? Morrison leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. We want you to help us find the source of the weapons leaks. We want you to use yourself as bait to draw out whoever is coordinating these bounties. And we want you to stay alive long enough to testify against whoever is responsible for selling American weapons to the people who've been killing American soldiers. The proposal was simple in concept and potentially suicidal in execution. Samantha would abandon her carefully maintained cover, allow herself to become visible to the terrorist networks hunting her, and hope that the FBI could protect her long enough to identify and capture whoever was responsible for the weapons trafficking. What makes you think I'll agree to this? Samantha asked. Agent Morrison withdrew one final document from the folder, a casualty report from Afghanistan dated just 6 weeks ago. The report detailed an ambush of an American convoy that had resulted in the deaths of 4 soldiers and the critical wounding of 3 others. The weapons used in the attack had been American-made, sold through the same trafficking network that Rebecca Chun had been investigating. Because, Agent Morrison said quietly, American soldiers are dying from American weapons, and you're the only person who might be able to stop it. Samantha looked at the casualty report, reading the names of soldiers who died from weapons that should have been protecting American interests, not killing American personnel. The ethical calculation was simple: her personal safety against the lives of soldiers who were dying because someone was selling weapons to their enemies. If I agree to this, Samantha said finally, I need guarantees. Full federal protection. New identity documents and extraction procedures if the operation goes wrong. Done, Agent Morrison replied immediately. We've already prepared safe houses, backup identities, and extraction protocols. The only question is whether you're willing to stop hiding and start fighting back. Samantha thought about the 3 years she'd spent as Sarah Reynolds, the quiet life of VA appointments and carefully managed anonymity. She thought about the soldiers who died from American weapons, about Rebecca Chun's whispered words about Phoenix, and about the terrorist networks that had been hunting her with increasing sophistication. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. When do we start? Samantha asked. Agent Morrison smiled for the first time since she'd sat down. We start by making sure the right people know that Samantha Reyes is back in the game. The FBI safe house in Scottsdale looked like every other suburban home in the upscale neighborhood: Spanish tile roof, desert landscaping, and the kind of unremarkable affluence that made it invisible to anyone not specifically looking for federal surveillance operations. Samantha sat in the living room that had been converted into a tactical command center, watching Agent Morrison coordinate with a team of analysts who'd transformed the dining room into something that resembled a high-tech war room. 40-8 hours had passed since their meeting at the coffee shop. And Samantha's world had been completely restructured around a single objective: exposing the weapons trafficking network that had put a target on her back. The transition from Sarah Reynolds back to Samantha Reyes had been jarring, like putting on military gear after 3 years in civilian clothes. Familiar but weighted with implications she was still processing. "We've identified 3 potential entry points into the trafficking network," Agent Morrison announced, spreading satellite photographs across the coffee table that had been cleared of everything except tactical planning materials. "All of them require you to surface publicly enough to trigger interest from whoever is coordinating the bounties on your head." Agent David Park, the FBI's lead analyst on the case, looked up from his laptop where streams of data flowed across multiple screens. Park was younger than Samantha had expected, early 30s, with the intense focus of someone who'd spent his career tracking digital footprints through the darkest corners of the internet. His presence suggested that this operation involved considerably more technological sophistication than traditional fieldwork. The bounty postings started appearing on 3 different dark web markets 6 weeks ago, Park explained, rotating his laptop so Samantha could see the encrypted communications he'd been monitoring. "Someone with serious resources has been putting out feelers, looking for freelance operatives willing to track down and eliminate a specific target." The laptop screen showed fragments of conversations in multiple languages: Arabic, Russian, Farsi, but the photographs were unmistakably of Samantha. Not the grainy security camera footage from Syria, but the enhanced, high-resolution images that Agent Morrison had shown her at the coffee shop. "The sophistication level is concerning," Park continued. "Whoever is coordinating this has access to military-grade enhancement software, international banking networks, and the kind of communication security that suggests government-level resources." Samantha studied the intercepts, noting details that painted a picture of an operation far more complex than simple revenge. The bounty amounts varied by location and method, significantly higher payouts for eliminations that looked like accidents. Premium rates for operations that could be conducted without attracting federal attention, and bonus payments for anyone who could provide confirmation that the target had been permanently silenced. "They're not just trying to kill me," Samantha observed. "They're trying to kill me quietly, in a way that doesn't trigger a massive federal investigation. Which tells us that whoever is behind this has something to lose if you start talking to the right people," Agent Morrison said. "Something significant enough to justify spending this kind of money to ensure your silence." The third member of the FBI team, Agent Jennifer Walsh, entered from the kitchen carrying coffee and the kind of grim expression that suggested she'd been reviewing intelligence reports that didn't contain good news. Walsh was older than Morrison and Park, with the weathered competence of someone who'd spent decades working cases that never made headlines but kept Americans safe. "I've been going through Rebecca Chun's original investigation files," Walsh announced, settling into a chair across from Samantha. The arms trafficking she uncovered was considerably more extensive than what she reported publicly. She had evidence of American weapons showing up in conflicts across 3 continents, always through intermediaries that made direct tracking impossible. Walsh opened a tablet and began scrolling through documents that Samantha recognized as classified intelligence reports. But there was a pattern. Every weapons shipment that ended up in terrorist hands had been processed through a specific logistics network. Always the same security clearances, always the same transportation companies, always the same financial institutions handling the transfers. "And?" Samantha prompted. "And all of them trace back to defense contractors with headquarters or major operations in Phoenix, Arizona," Walsh said quietly. Rebecca Chun was getting close to identifying the specific individuals responsible when she was captured in Syria. The implications hit Samantha with sudden clarity. Rebecca Chun hadn't been taken by terrorists because of her general investigation into arms trafficking. She'd been specifically targeted because her research was about to expose American officials who were selling weapons to the enemies they were supposed to be fighting. The extraction mission, Samantha said, understanding beginning to dawn. It wasn't a rescue operation. It was a damage control operation. Agent Morrison nodded grimly. Someone wanted Chun eliminated before she could publish what she'd discovered. When the diplomatic approach failed and the terrorist group wouldn't cooperate, they needed a different solution. So they used my team to extract her, Samantha continued, knowing that the mission would compromise our identities and make us targets for elimination. 2 problems solved with 1 operation. The room fell silent as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Samantha's rescue of Rebecca Chun hadn't been a heroic intervention to save an American journalist. It had been a carefully orchestrated operation designed to extract Chun before she could expose the weapons trafficking network, while simultaneously eliminating the special operations team that had conducted the mission. The security cameras, Samantha said. They weren't a malfunction or an oversight. Someone wanted our faces captured and distributed. We believe so, Park confirmed. The terrorist compound surveillance system had been upgraded just weeks before Chun's capture. Military-grade equipment that was far more sophisticated than anything they should have had access to. Agent Walsh leaned forward, her expression carrying the weight of someone about to deliver particularly bad news. Samantha, there's something else you need to know about your former team members. Samantha felt her blood go cold. She hadn't been in contact with any of her former teammates since the unit had been disbanded, but she'd assumed they were all living under new identities similar to her own. Sergeant Marcus Thompson was killed in a car accident in Ver 8 months ago. Walsh continued. Corporal James Mitchell died in what appeared to be a home invasion in Detroit 6 months ago. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos was found dead from an apparent drug overdose in San Antonio 3 months ago. The coffee cup in Samantha's hand began to shake as the full scope of the systematic elimination became clear. Her entire team, the soldiers who'd conducted the Syria extraction with her, had been murdered one by one, their deaths disguised as accidents and coincidences that wouldn't trigger federal investigations. How many of us are left? Samantha asked quietly. You and Sergeant Kevin Bradley, Morrison replied. Bradley is currently in protective custody at a federal facility in Colorado. He contacted the Bureau 2 weeks ago when he realized that the deaths of your former teammates weren't coincidental. Samantha closed her eyes, thinking about the soldiers she'd served with for 5 years. Marcus Thompson, who'd sent pictures of his newborn daughter to the team group chat just days before the Syria mission. James Mitchell, who'd been planning to propose to his girlfriend when they returned from deployment. Maria Santos, who'd been studying for her college entrance exams and dreaming of becoming a veterinarian after her military service ended. All of them dead because they'd been used as expendable assets in an operation designed to protect weapons traffickers who were selling American equipment to America's enemies. The Rebecca Chun angle, Samantha said, opening her eyes and focusing on the immediate tactical situation. If I surface publicly in connection with her story, whoever is behind this will have to respond. That's our assessment, Morrison confirmed. Chun is scheduled to receive a journalism award next week at the Phoenix Press Club. It's a public event with significant media coverage. If you were to attend as her guest, I'd be completely exposed, Samantha finished. No cover, no protection. Except whatever the Bureau can provide, and every terrorist with my photograph would know exactly where to find me. But, Agent Park added, whoever is coordinating the bounties would also be forced to accelerate their timeline. Instead of waiting for freelance operatives to track you down, they'd need to deploy their own assets to ensure you're eliminated before you can speak publicly about the Syria operation. The tactical logic was sound but potentially suicidal. By making herself a public target, Samantha would force the conspiracy into the open where federal agents could observe. and potentially intercept their communications. The risk was that she might not survive the exposure long enough for the FBI to identify and arrest the people responsible. "What kind of backup would I have?" Samantha asked. Agent Walsh opened a tactical planning folder that contained building schematics, surveillance protocols, and emergency extraction procedures. The Phoenix Press Club event will have complete federal surveillance coverage. Every person entering the building will be photographed and identified. Every vehicle in a 6-block radius will be monitored. Every communication frequency in the area will be intercepted and analyzed. And if someone decides to use a sniper rifle from 800 yards out, Samantha asked. "Counter-sharpshooter teams on every building with line of sight to the venue," Morrison replied without hesitation. "Electronic jamming of any remote detonation devices. Armored vehicles staged for immediate extraction if the situation deteriorates." The level of federal resources being committed to the operation suggested that exposing the weapons trafficking network was a significant priority for the intelligence community. It also suggested that the people responsible had access to resources that made them a serious threat to national security. "There's one more thing," Agent Park said, pulling up a different set of data on his laptop. "We've been monitoring communications from several known terrorist operatives over the past week. Someone has been putting together a team specifically to target you during the Phoenix Press Club event." The laptop screen showed intercepted messages that had been translated from Arabic and Farsi, references to the American operative, the Phoenix target, and final payment upon confirmation. The communications were fragmented and encrypted. But the general intent was clear enough. "How many?" Samantha asked. "At least 6 confirmed operatives," Park replied. "Possibly more. All of them professionals with experience in urban elimination operations." Samantha looked around the FBI command center at the agents who were asking her to walk into a carefully prepared ambush in order to expose a conspiracy that had already resulted in the deaths of her former teammates. The operational parameters were clear. High probability of success in exposing the weapons trafficking network. Moderate probability of surviving the exposure. "When is the awards ceremony?" she asked. "Thursday evening," Morrison replied. 5 days from now. 5 days to prepare for an operation that would either expose the people responsible for selling American weapons to America's enemies, or result in Samantha Reyes joining her former teammates in whatever afterlife awaited soldiers who'd been betrayed by the people they'd sworn to protect. "I'll need my gear," Samantha said finally. "Real gear. Not the civilian clothes and false documents. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it as Samantha Reyes, not Sarah Reynolds." Agent Morrison smiled with the grim satisfaction of someone whose carefully planned operation had just received the approval it needed to proceed. "Welcome back to active duty, Staff Sergeant," she said outside the safe house. The Arizona desert stretched toward mountains that glowed red in the setting sun, beautiful and unforgiving in the way that had always appealed to soldiers who understood that some missions were worth the risk, regardless of the personal cost. The secure conference room at the FBI's Phoenix field office buzzed with the controlled urgency of an operation moving into its final phases. Samantha sat at the head of a polished conference table surrounded by federal agents, intelligence analysts, and tactical specialists who'd spent the past 72 hours transforming Rebecca Chun's award ceremony into the most heavily monitored public event in Arizona's recent history. Agent Morrison stood at a wall-mounted monitor displaying a 3-dimensional tactical map of downtown Phoenix, with the press club building highlighted in red and overlaid with security zones that extended for 6 blocks in every direction. The level of federal resources being deployed looked more appropriate for protecting a presidential visit than for catching weapons traffickers, but Samantha understood that the people they were hunting had demonstrated capabilities that required overwhelming response. "We've identified the building," Agent Park announced from his position at a laptop connected to multiple intelligence databases. Rebecca Chun's investigation led her to Meridian Defense Solutions, a private military contractor. With headquarters in the Phoenix Business District, just 8 blocks from where you'll be appearing tonight. The monitor switched to satellite imagery of a gleaming office complex that looked indistinguishable from dozens of other corporate headquarters scattered throughout Phoenix's financial district. But as Park manipulated the display to show interior schematics and personnel records, Samantha could see why Chun's investigation had focused on this particular company. Meridian Defense has held logistics contracts with the Department of Defense for the past 12 years, Park continued. They handle procurement, transportation, and distribution of military equipment to overseas operations. The perfect position to redirect weapons shipments without triggering automatic oversight protocols. Agent Walsh, who'd been coordinating with intelligence agencies in Washington, looked up from a secure phone conversation with the expression of someone who just received disturbing confirmation of their worst suspicions. I've got updates from the Pentagon's internal investigation. 3 major weapons shipments that ended up in terrorist hands over the past 18 months all passed through Meridian's logistics network. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. They weren't just dealing with a single corrupt official selling weapons to terrorists. They were looking at a private military contractor that had systematically diverted American military equipment to America's enemies while maintaining legitimate government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. How long has this been going on? Samantha asked. Based on Chun's research, at least 5 years, Morrison replied. Possibly longer. The operation was sophisticated enough to avoid detection by standard oversight mechanisms, which suggests high-level cooperation from multiple individuals within the defense establishment. Agent Rodriguez, the tactical team leader who'd been coordinating security for the evening's operation, spread building schematics across the conference table with the focused intensity of someone planning a military assault. Rodriguez was a former Marine with the kind of methodical approach to complex operations that came from years of experience in situations where mistakes got people killed. The Phoenix Press Club is a converted bank building from the 1920s, Rodriguez explained, pointing to architectural details that would affect both security and potential attack vectors. 3 floors, multiple entrances, and enough internal complexity to provide cover for hostiles who managed to penetrate the outer security perimeter. Samantha studied the building layout with the professional interest of someone who'd spent years conducting operations in hostile urban environments. The press club's location in downtown Phoenix provided numerous advantages for attackers. Multiple high-rise buildings with line of sight to the venue, complex street patterns that would complicate surveillance, and enough civilian foot traffic to mask hostile reconnaissance. What's our backup plan if the outer security fails? She asked. Immediate extraction through the building's basement level, Rodriguez replied, tracing evacuation routes with his finger. Armored vehicles staged in the parking garage, helicopter support available from the federal building 6 blocks north, and tactical teams positioned to provide covering fire during withdrawal. The extraction plan was thorough and professional. But Samantha had enough experience with complex operations to know that even the best plans rarely survived contact with determined adversaries. The people hunting her had demonstrated capabilities that suggested they would be prepared for significant federal opposition. Agent Park's laptop chimed with an incoming priority message that immediately captured everyone's attention. We've got movement, he announced, pulling up real-time surveillance data on the main monitor. 6 individuals arrived in Phoenix over the past 24 hours, all using false documentation, all with travel patterns that suggest coordinated planning. The monitor displayed passport photographs and travel records for 6 men who looked like professionals from various Middle Eastern and North African countries. None of them appeared on official terrorist watch lists, But their synchronized arrival and carefully constructed false identities suggested operational sophistication that went far beyond amateur freelance bounty hunters. Facial recognition software indicates that at least 3 of them have been linked to previous operations against American targets, Park continued. We're dealing with experienced professionals, not desperate amateurs looking for easy money. Samantha studied the photographs, noting details that confirmed her assessment of the threat level. These were soldiers, not criminals, men with military bearing and operational discipline, who'd been selected specifically for their ability to conduct precision eliminations in challenging environments. Have we identified their accommodations? She asked. Negative, Rodriguez replied. They scattered after arriving at Sky Harbor Airport, using different transportation methods and disappearing into the general population. Standard procedure for hostile operatives conducting surveillance and target preparation. The fact that 6 trained assassins were currently somewhere in Phoenix, preparing to eliminate her during a public event, should have been terrifying. Instead, Samantha felt the familiar clarity that came with transitioning from uncertainty to active operations. After 3 years of hiding and wondering when they would find her, the situation had finally become simple. Tonight, she would either expose the people responsible for betraying her team, or she would join her murdered teammates. Agent Morrison, Samantha said, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer honestly. Morrison looked up from the tactical planning documents with the expression of someone prepared for difficult questions. The FBI's interest in this case, Samantha continued, goes beyond investigating weapons trafficking and protecting a former special operations soldier. What aren't you telling me about why this operation is so important? Morrison exchanged glances with the other agents in the room before responding with the careful precision of someone who'd been authorized to reveal classified information under specific circumstances. 3 weeks ago, American Special Forces conducted a raid against a terrorist compound in eastern Syria, Morrison said quietly. The target was a high-value individual suspected of coordinating attacks against American installations throughout the region. The monitor switched to classified footage from the Syria raid, infrared imagery from drone surveillance showing American soldiers approaching a fortified compound under cover of darkness. Samantha recognized the tactical formations and movement patterns of her former unit's operational procedures. The raid was a complete success, Morrison continued. The target was eliminated, valuable intelligence was recovered, and American forces withdrew without casualties. But when intelligence analysts reviewed the recovered materials, they found something unexpected. The footage switched to photographs of weapons caches discovered inside the terrorist compound. Samantha felt her blood go cold as she recognized American military equipment, rifles, ammunition, explosives, and communications gear that should have been in the hands of American soldiers, not in terrorist weapons stockpiles. Every weapon in that cache had been manufactured within the past 6 months, Morrison said. All of them had been shipped to American forces in the Middle East through logistics contracts managed by Meridian Defense Solutions. The implications were staggering. Not only had Meridian been selling American weapons to terrorists, but those weapons had been used to equip the same terrorist compounds that American special forces were being sent to assault. American soldiers were being ordered to attack enemies who'd been armed with American equipment by American contractors. How many operations have been compromised? Samantha asked. We don't know, Walsh replied. But preliminary analysis suggests that terrorist organizations across the region have been receiving American equipment through the same network that Rebecca Chun was investigating when she was captured. Samantha stood and walked to the window, overlooking downtown Phoenix, where ordinary civilian life continued, unaware that 6 professional assassins were somewhere in the city, preparing to eliminate a former special operations soldier who'd stumbled into a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the American defense establishment. The awards ceremony tonight she said without turning around, isn't just about exposing Meridian defense. It's about stopping a systematic betrayal of American military operations. That's correct, Morrison confirmed. If we can identify and arrest the individuals responsible for the weapons trafficking, we can prevent future American operations from being compromised by the people they're supposed to trust. Samantha turned back to face the room full of federal agents who were asking her to risk her life to protect soldiers she'd never met, from betrayal by officials she'd never seen. The ethical calculation was simple: her personal safety against the lives of American soldiers who were being sent into combat against enemies armed with American weapons by American traitors. "Agent Rodriguez," she said, "I want to review the tactical plan one more time. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." For the next 2 hours, they refined every detail of the evening's operation. Surveillance protocols, communication procedures, emergency extraction routes, and contingency plans for scenarios that ranged from simple sniper attacks to complex, multi-vector assaults involving explosives and coordinated ground teams. As the sun began to set over Phoenix, painting the desert mountains in shades of red and gold that reminded Samantha of every deployment she'd ever served, she felt the familiar weight of preparation settling on her shoulders. Tonight, she would step out of 3 years of hiding and back into the world of active operations, where split-second decisions determined who lived and who died. But this time, she wouldn't be fighting for classified objectives that couldn't be officially acknowledged. She would be fighting to protect American soldiers from American betrayal, to expose corruption that was getting her countrymen killed, and to honor the memory of teammates who'd been murdered for doing their jobs too well. Final equipment check. In 30 minutes, Rodriguez announced. Transportation to the venue departs at 1800 hours. Samantha nodded and headed toward the equipment room, where tactical gear waited that would transform her from Sarah Reynolds, struggling veteran, back into Staff Sergeant Samantha Reyes, professional soldier. The transition felt like coming home. The Phoenix Press Club's main ballroom glittered with the kind of polished elegance that made it a perfect venue for honoring investigative journalists who'd risked their lives to expose international corruption. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over circular tables where media executives, government officials, and civic leaders gathered to celebrate Rebecca Chun's Pulitzer Prize-winning series on arms trafficking in the Middle East. Samantha stood near the back of the room, wearing a black evening dress that concealed body armor and a communication device that kept her connected to the FBI tactical team positioned throughout the building. To the casual observer, she looked like any other guest at the awards ceremony, perhaps a colleague of Chun's or a supporter of investigative journalism. But every federal agent in the room knew that she was the most valuable and vulnerable person in attendance. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled softly through her earpiece as she surveyed the crowd of approximately 200 guests. Overwatch teams report all clear. No unusual activity on surrounding rooftops. No suspicious vehicles in the immediate area. Looks like your arrival didn't trigger immediate response. Samantha had entered the building through the main entrance exactly as planned, allowing multiple surveillance cameras to capture clear images of her face that would be transmitted through various intelligence networks within minutes. If the bounty hunters were monitoring federal communications or had assets inside the event, they would know that their target had finally surfaced in a public venue with limited escape routes. Rebecca Chun approached from across the room, weaving through clusters of guests with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being the center of attention at prestigious events. Chun was smaller than Samantha had remembered from the extraction in Syria, the kind of compact intensity that had allowed her to survive 3 weeks in terrorist captivity and return to win journalism's highest honor for her reporting on the 5 weeks in terrorist captivity, and return to win journalism's highest honor for her reporting on the FIANSM experience. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," Chun said quietly as she reached Samantha's position near the wall, that provided clear sightlines to all entrances. When Agent Morrison explained the situation, I thought you might decide the risk was too great. Samantha studied Chun's face, looking for any sign that the journalist remembered their brief interaction during the helicopter extraction 3 years ago. Chun's expression showed recognition but also confusion, as if she was trying to reconcile. The woman in evening dress with fragmentary memories of a soldier in combat gear, pulling her out of a nightmare. You saved my life in Syria, Chun continued. I remember pieces of that night, enough to know that you and your team took enormous risks to get me out of that compound. I never had the chance to thank you properly. You don't need to thank us, Samantha replied, maintaining the casual tone of someone making conversation at a social event. We were doing our jobs. But even as she spoke, Samantha was conducting the kind of tactical assessment that had become second nature during her operational years. The ballroom's layout provided multiple advantages for attackers: numerous entry points, complex interior, architecture that could mask hostile movement, and enough civilians to create chaos that would complicate any federal response. Agent Park's voice whispered through her earpiece with an update that made her blood run cold. We've got positive identification on 2 of the targets. Facial recognition confirms that at least 2 of the suspected operatives are inside the building, currently moving through the lower-level service areas. Samantha's training kicked in. Automatically, her body shifting into the heightened awareness state that allowed her to maintain normal conversation while preparing for potential combat. She smiled at Rebecca Chun and continued their discussion of journalism and courage, but her eyes were constantly moving, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. The story I published about the arms trafficking, Chun said, lowering her voice as if sharing confidential information, only covered about half of what I actually discovered. The evidence I found suggested that the weapons sales weren't just random corruption. They were part of a systematic operation that reached into multiple levels of the American defense establishment. This was the moment Samantha had been waiting for. During the extraction, Chun had whispered something about Phoenix knowing everything. If Chun had discovered additional evidence that could identify the specific individuals responsible for the weapons trafficking, that information could be crucial for exposing the entire network. What kind of systematic operation? Samantha asked, stepping closer to Chun so their conversation couldn't be overheard by nearby guests. Financial records showed patterns that suggested someone was deliberately targeting specific military operations, Chun replied. The weapons weren't being sold randomly to the highest bidder. They were being provided to terrorist groups in areas where American special forces were scheduled to conduct operations. The implications hit Samantha like a physical blow. Not only were American contractors selling weapons to terrorists, but they were specifically arming enemies that American soldiers would be ordered to fight. The betrayal went beyond simple corruption into active sabotage of American military operations. How specific were these patterns? Samantha pressed. Specific enough that someone could predict where American forces would be deployed and ensure that their enemies would be properly equipped to fight them, Chun said quietly. The kind of intelligence that would only be available to people with access to classified operational planning. Agent Rodriguez's voice cut through her earpiece with urgent tactical updates. Movement on the 3rd floor. 2 suspects have accessed the building's upper levels through service elevators. Federal teams are moving to intercept, but we may have hostiles with elevated positions and clear sight lines to the ballroom. Samantha felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with transitioning from surveillance to active threat response. The professional assassins hunting her had finally made their move, and the next few minutes would determine whether the FBI's elaborate protection plan was sufficient to keep her alive long enough to expose the weapons trafficking conspiracy. Rebecca, Samantha said, maintaining her calm demeanor while calculating the fastest route to the nearest exit. I need you to move toward the back of the room, away from the windows. Can you do that without attracting attention? Chun's eyes widened as she realized that their conversation about arms trafficking had suddenly become secondary to immediate physical danger. Are they here? The people who've been hunting you? Just move slowly toward the back wall, Samantha instructed, her training taking over as she began positioning herself to protect the journalist, while maintaining visual contact with potential threat vectors. Don't run, don't look around, just walk casually toward the exit nearest the kitchen. Agent Park's voice crackled through the communication system with updates that confirmed Samantha's worst fears. Third suspect identified entering through the main entrance. Fourth suspect moving through the basement level. We've got coordinated movement suggesting a multi-vector assault plan. The award ceremony continued around them with the normal rhythm of a prestigious social event. The keynote speaker was discussing the importance of investigative journalism in maintaining democratic accountability, while waiters circulated through the crowd serving champagne and hors d'oeuvres. None of the civilian guests had any indication that federal agents were tracking multiple hostile operatives through the building's interior. Samantha guided Rebecca Chun toward the back of the ballroom while maintaining constant visual surveillance of the room's entry points. Her evening dress concealed a Glock 26 that Agent Morrison had insisted she carry, despite regulations that normally prohibited armed civilians at federal operations. Tonight, Samantha wasn't a civilian. She was bait in a trap designed to catch weapons traffickers who'd been betraying American soldiers for years. Contact. Agent Rodriguez's voice exploded through her earpiece. Shots fired on the third floor. Federal agents under attack. Multiple hostiles confirmed armed with automatic weapons. The sound of gunfire echoed through the building structure, audible even over the ambient noise of the award ceremony. Guests began looking around with the confused concern of people who weren't sure whether they'd heard construction noise or something more dangerous. Samantha made a split-second decision that went against every federal protocol but aligned perfectly with her operational training. Instead of moving toward the nearest exit as planned, she stepped away from Rebecca Chun and began walking directly toward the ballroom's main entrance, making herself visible to anyone monitoring the room from external positions. Rodriguez, this is Reyes, she said quietly into her communication device. I'm moving to draw fire away from civilians. Recommend immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel. Negative, Reyes, Rodriguez's voice crackled back. Maintain defensive position and wait for tactical teams to clear the building. But Samantha was already moving, her years of special operations experience overriding federal procedures that had been designed for protecting witnesses, not for conducting active operations against professional assassins. She reached the ballroom's main entrance just as the building's fire alarm system activated, triggered by FBI agents who were implementing emergency evacuation protocols. The ballroom erupted into controlled chaos as 200 guests began moving toward exits under the guidance of federal agents who were trying to maintain order while responding to active threats on multiple floors. Samantha used the confusion to slip through the main entrance and into the building's central corridor, where she could move more freely while drawing hostile attention away from civilians. Agent Park's voice provided tactical updates as she moved through the press club's ornate hallways. 5 suspects now confirmed inside the building. 6th suspect spotted in vehicle outside, likely serving as extraction support. Pattern suggests coordinated assault rather than simple elimination attempt. Samantha reached the building's main staircase and began climbing toward the 3rd floor, where federal agents were engaged in active combat with professional operatives who'd been hired to ensure her permanent silence. The sound of automatic weapons fire grew louder as she moved higher in the building, punctuated by the controlled bursts of federal tactical teams returning fire. She reached the 3rd floor landing and immediately identified 2 bodies in the hallway, both wearing the tactical gear of federal agents. The sight filled her with cold rage as she realized that American law enforcement officers were dying to protect her from assassins hired by American defense contractors who were selling weapons to America's enemies. "Rodriguez, this is Reyes," she whispered into her communication device. "I'm on the 3rd floor. 2 federal agents down. Where do you need me?" The response came back immediately, carrying the controlled urgency of a tactical commander coordinating multiple engagements simultaneously. Conference room at the end of the hall. 3 hostiles barricaded inside with automatic weapons and explosive devices. Federal teams are pinned down in the hallway. Samantha moved toward the conference room with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd conducted building clearance operations in hostile territory. Behind her, the sound of evacuation continued as federal agents guided civilians out of the building while tactical teams fought to eliminate the threats that had come to kill her. For the first time in 3 years, Staff Sergeant Samantha Reyes was back in active combat, fighting to protect innocent people from enemies who'd been armed by American traitors with American weapons. The irony wasn't lost on her. The Phoenix Press Club's 3rd floor conference room had been transformed into a fortified position by professional operatives who'd come prepared for extended combat against federal tactical teams. Samantha could hear the distinctive sound of automatic weapons fire echoing through the hallway as she approached the barricaded door, punctuated by the controlled bursts of FBI agents returning fire from positions behind overturned furniture and architectural barriers. Agent Rodriguez crouched behind a marble pillar near the conference room entrance, coordinating tactical radio communications, while blood seeped through a field dressing on his left shoulder. When he saw Samantha approaching, his expression shifted from surprise to professional calculation, as he realized that their protected witness had just become an active combatant. "Reyes, you're supposed to be in protective custody," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying the controlled tension of someone managing multiple crisis situations simultaneously. "We've got 3 hostiles with superior firepower and elevated positions. This isn't a rescue mission, it's a tactical assault." Samantha knelt beside Rodriguez and began assessing the situation with the methodical precision of someone who'd conducted building clearance operations in hostile urban environments. The conference room's heavy wooden doors had been reinforced with furniture and debris, creating firing positions that allowed the occupants to control the hallway while remaining protected from direct assault. "What's their ammunition status?" she asked, pulling the Glock 26 from its concealment beneath her evening dress and checking the magazine with automatic efficiency. "Unknown, but they've been laying down suppressing fire for the past 10 minutes, without any apparent concern about conservation," Rodriguez replied. "These aren't desperate amateurs running out of resources. They're professionals who came prepared for sustained engagement." Agent Walsh's voice crackled through the tactical communication system with updates that painted an increasingly complex picture of the assault. 4th and 5th suspects have been neutralized on the lower floors, but the 6th suspect is still mobile somewhere in the building. Pattern suggests they're not just trying to eliminate the primary target, they're conducting a comprehensive operation designed to eliminate all witnesses. The implications were chilling. The professional assassins weren't just hunting Samantha to collect bounty payments. They were conducting a systematic elimination operation designed to prevent anyone from exposing the weapons trafficking network that had been betraying American military operations for years. Samantha studied the tactical situation with the focused intensity that had made her legendary among special operations personnel. The conference room's position at the end of the hallway created a natural choke point that favored defenders, but it also limited their escape routes in ways that could be exploited by attackers with sufficient tactical sophistication. "Rodriguez, I need you to coordinate suppressing fire from federal positions," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. "I'm going to use the service corridors. to approach from their flank. "Negative," Rodriguez replied immediately. "You're a protected witness, not an active combatant. My orders are to keep you alive, not to deploy you as an assault element." But Samantha was already moving, her operational instincts overriding federal protocols that had been designed for conventional protection scenarios. The professional assassins in the conference room weren't conventional threats, they were soldiers. Conducting a military operation and defeating them required military responses, not law enforcement procedures. She located the service corridor entrance behind a maintenance door that had been left unlocked during the building's evacuation. The narrow hallway provided access to the building's utility systems and allowed movement between rooms without using the main corridors where federal agents were pinned down by hostile fire. As she moved through the service area, Samantha's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message that made her blood run cold. The text was brief but carried implications that changed everything about the tactical situation. Meridian Defense employees evacuated from headquarters. Building 30 minutes ago. Executive staff departed Phoenix on private aircraft. Operation Phoenix compromised. The message meant that the weapons trafficking conspiracy had been activated by the Firefight at the press club. Instead of waiting to see whether the assassination attempt succeeded, the people responsible for selling American weapons to terrorists were implementing emergency protocols that would allow them to disappear before federal investigators could identify and arrest them. Samantha reached the service corridor junction that provided access to the conference room from its rear wall. Through the thin drywall construction, she could hear voices speaking in Arabic, professional communications coordinating fields of fire and ammunition management. The assassins were conducting themselves like soldiers, not criminals, which confirmed her assessment that they'd been sent by people with military-level operational capabilities. She positioned herself against the wall adjacent to the conference room and activated her communication device to coordinate with the federal tactical teams in the main hallway. "Rodriguez, this is Reyes. I'm in position to breach from the rear. On my signal, initiate maximum suppressing fire to fix their attention on the primary approach." "Reyes, you're not authorized for independent tactical action," Rodriguez's voice crackled back. "Wait for backup elements to arrive before attempting any breach." But Samantha had already identified the structural weak point in the conference room's rear wall, a section where utility conduits had been installed that would allow rapid entry if properly exploited. She pulled a small explosive charge from the tactical kit that Agent Morrison had insisted she carry, despite regulations that normally prohibited civilians from possessing military-grade equipment. "Rodriguez, initiate suppressing fire in 30 seconds, she said quietly. "I'm going to end this." The next 20 seconds passed in the heightened awareness state that Samantha remembered from every combat operation she'd ever conducted. Time seemed to slow as she prepared the breaching charge, calculated blast angles to minimize collateral damage, and positioned herself for immediate entry once the wall was compromised. Agent Rodriguez's tactical team opened fire on the conference room's main entrance exactly on schedule, filling the hallway with the controlled bursts of federal weapons systems, engaging multiple targets simultaneously. The sound of automatic weapons fire intensified as the professional assassins returned fire, their attention focused entirely on the frontal assault. Samantha detonated the breaching charge. The rear wall of the conference room exploded inward in a shower of drywall and debris, creating an opening large enough for rapid entry while stunning the occupants with unexpected blast effects. Samantha moved through the breach immediately, her Glock 26 tracking potential targets as she entered the smoke-filled room. 2 of the assassins were down, eliminated by the combined effects of the explosive breach and immediate follow-up fire from federal tactical teams. The 3rd operative was wounded, but still mobile, attempting to reach a briefcase near the conference room's windows that undoubtedly contained either escape equipment or additional weapons. Samantha engaged the remaining hostile with 2 precise shots to center mass, ending the immediate threat, while federal agents moved through the main entrance to secure the room. The entire engagement had lasted less than 4 minutes, but it had resulted in the elimination of professional operatives who'd been hired to prevent exposure of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American defense contracting. Agent Rodriguez entered the conference room with the controlled urgency of someone conducting post-combat operations under time pressure. "Area secure, hostile elements neutralized," he announced into his tactical radio. "Beginning evidence collection and site exploitation." But as federal agents began processing the scene, Agent Park's voice crackled through the communication system with intelligence updates that revealed the true scope of what they were facing. "Meridian Defense Headquarters is empty. All executive personnel have disappeared, along with computer servers and financial records that could have identified the full extent of the weapons trafficking network." Samantha looked around the conference room that had been turned into a battlefield to protect her from assassins hired by American defense contractors who were selling American weapons to America's enemies. The professional operatives lying dead on the floor had been soldiers, not criminals, men who'd been recruited and equipped by people with access to military-grade resources and intelligence capabilities. "The briefcase," she said, pointing toward the weapon case that the final assassin had been attempting to reach. "Whatever's in there might tell us who hired them." Agent Walsh opened the briefcase with the careful precision of someone trained in explosive ordnance disposal, revealing contents that confirmed their worst suspicions about the sophistication of the conspiracy they were fighting. Inside were encrypted communication devices, financial transfer documentation, and detailed intelligence files about federal investigation procedures that should have been classified beyond the reach of private contractors. "These files contain information about our investigation," Walsh announced grimly. "Operational details, surveillance protocols, and tactical plans that were supposed to be restricted to federal personnel only." The implications were staggering. Not only had Meridian Defense been selling American weapons to terrorists, but they had infiltrated the federal investigation designed to expose their activities. The conspiracy included people inside the American intelligence establishment who'd been providing classified information to the weapons traffickers. Rodriguez's tactical radio erupted with priority communications from federal teams throughout Phoenix. "All units, priority alert. Meridian Defense executives confirmed departed on private aircraft bound for non-extradition jurisdictions. Primary suspects have fled American territory." Samantha felt the cold reality of operational failure settling on her shoulders. They'd successfully defeated the assassination attempt and gathered evidence of the weapons trafficking conspiracy, but the people responsible had escaped before they could be arrested and brought to trial. "Agent Morrison," she said into her communication device, "what's the status of our investigation? Do we have enough evidence to pursue the escaped executives through international channels?" Morrison's response carried the frustration of someone watching criminals escape through legal technicalities and jurisdictional limitations. "We have evidence of weapons trafficking, but the primary suspects are now in countries that don't honor American extradition requests. They're beyond our reach unless they voluntarily return to American territory." As federal agents continued processing the crime scene, Samantha walked to the conference room's windows and looked out over downtown Phoenix, where ordinary civilian life continued, unaware that American soldiers were being betrayed by American officials who were selling weapons to America's enemies. The immediate threat had been eliminated, but the systematic corruption that had resulted in the deaths of her teammates was still operational, still selling American equipment to terrorist organizations, still compromising American military operations around the world. Staff Sergeant Samantha Reyes had successfully survived the assassination attempt designed to silence her permanently. But the war against the people who'd betrayed her country was just beginning. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched toward mountains that glowed red in the setting sun, beautiful and unforgiving in the way that it always reminded soldiers that some battles were worth fighting, regardless of whether victory was guaranteed. The secure debriefing room at the FBI's Phoenix field office felt like a tomb at 3 a.m. Samantha sat across from Agent Morrison, surrounded by evidence boxes containing everything recovered from the press club assault. Encrypted communication devices, financial records, and intelligence files that painted a picture of corruption, extending far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Morrison's face as she reviewed preliminary analysis reports that had been streaming in from federal laboratories throughout the night. Each new piece of evidence revealed additional layers of the conspiracy that had cost Samantha her teammates, her identity, and 3 years of her life. The communication devices recovered from the assassins were manufactured by Blackwater Communications, a subsidiary of Meridian Defense, Morrison announced, consulting a tablet filled with intelligence data that looked more appropriate for investigating foreign espionage than domestic weapons trafficking. Every piece of equipment they carried can be traced back to American defense contractors with active government security clearances. Samantha studied the evidence photographs spread across the conference table, noting details that confirmed her assessment of the professional capabilities they'd been fighting. The assassins hadn't been freelance bounty hunters recruited through dark web marketplaces. They'd been equipped and coordinated by people with access to military-grade resources and real-time intelligence about federal law enforcement operations. "How deep does this go?" she asked, though she suspected the answer would be worse than anything she wanted to hear. Agent Park entered the debriefing room carrying a secure laptop that displayed financial analysis data from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. His expression carried the grim satisfaction of someone who'd uncovered evidence of systematic criminal activity, mixed with the frustration of realizing that the criminals had been operating under official protection, deep enough to compromise multiple federal agencies, Park replied, connecting his laptop to the room's main display monitor. The financial records show payments flowing through shell corporations registered in 12 different countries, but all ultimately traceable to Defense Department contracts administered through the Pentagon's procurement office. The monitor, filled with financial flowcharts that looked more like intelligence diagrams than accounting records. Money had moved through international banking systems with the kind of sophisticated laundering techniques that required cooperation from financial institutions, government officials, and private contractors operating across multiple jurisdictions. "We're not just dealing with weapons trafficking," Morrison said quietly. "We're looking at a systematic corruption network that's been using American defense contracts to fund terrorist organizations while simultaneously selling them the equipment to fight American forces." The implications made Samantha's stomach turn. Not only had American officials been selling weapons to America's enemies, but they'd been using American taxpayer money to finance the operations. The Defense Department had been unknowingly funding its own betrayal through legitimate contracts that were being diverted to support terrorist activities. Agent Walsh entered the debriefing room with the kind of urgent energy that suggested she'd discovered something that changed the entire scope of their investigation. She carried a stack of classified documents that bore the security markings of multiple intelligence agencies, indicating information that had been compiled from sources across the American national security establishment. "I've been coordinating with the CIS Counterintelligence Center," Walsh announced, spreading the documents across the conference table with careful precision. "The weapons trafficking network we've been investigating is part of a larger operation that's been compromising American military activities for at least 7 years. The documents contained operational summaries from classified missions across 3 continents, raids against terrorist compounds that had been mysteriously prepared for American attacks. Intelligence operations that had been exposed before they could be completed, and weapons caches that had disappeared just before scheduled capture operations. Every compromised operation involved logistic support from companies associated with Meridian Defense, Walsh continued. They weren't just selling weapons to terrorists. They were providing operational intelligence that allowed terrorist organizations to prepare for American military activities. Samantha felt the familiar cold rage that came from understanding the full scope of betrayal that had cost her teammates their lives. The Syria extraction mission that had compromised her identity hadn't been a random intelligence failure. It had been deliberately sabotaged by American officials who'd wanted to eliminate her team while ensuring that Rebecca Chun's investigation never exposed their activities. The enhanced security cameras at the terrorist compound, she said, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Someone made sure our faces would be captured and distributed. That's our assessment, Morrison confirmed. The mission was designed to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously: eliminate Chun's investigation, compromise your team's identities, and provide justification for the systematic elimination of witnesses who could expose the weapons trafficking network. The debriefing room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of what they were discussing. American Special Operations soldiers had been set on a mission, specifically designed to get them killed or compromise them so thoroughly that they could be eliminated later through deniable means. Agent Rodriguez entered the room with his left arm in a sling but carrying the focused intensity of someone who'd just received intelligence updates that required immediate action. Despite his wounds from the press club assault, he'd spent the night coordinating with federal tactical teams across multiple jurisdictions, tracking the escaped Meridian Defense executives who'd fled American territory. "We've got movement," Rodriguez announced, connecting a secure tablet to the room's communication system. Two of the escaped executives have surfaced in Dubai, apparently believing they're beyond American reach. But they made a mistake. They're still using communication systems that we've been monitoring. The tablet's display showed intercepted communications between former Meridian Defense executives and unknown parties discussing asset liquidation and evidence disposal. The conversations were encrypted, but federal cryptographers had been working throughout the night to decode messages that revealed ongoing criminal activities. "They're not just hiding," Rodriguez continued. "They're actively working to eliminate remaining evidence and witnesses. This includes coordinating with terrorist organizations to ensure that anyone who could testify against them is permanently silenced." Samantha studied the intercepted communications, noting references to Phoenix assets and American operative elimination that clearly referred to continuing efforts to have her killed. The escaped executives weren't satisfied with simply fleeing American jurisdiction. They were continuing to coordinate assassination attempts against anyone who could expose their activities. "What about Sergeant Bradley?" she asked, referring to her former teammate who'd been in federal protective custody since contacting the Bureau about the systematic elimination of their unit. Morrison's expression darkened as she consulted secure communications from the federal facility in Colorado where Bradley had been hidden. Bradley's protective detail was attacked 6 hours ago. 3 federal agents killed, 1 wounded. Bradley is missing, presumed captured by hostile operatives, working for the same network that sent the assassins to Phoenix. The news hit Samantha like a physical blow. Kevin Bradley was the last surviving member of her former team, a soldier who'd served with distinction for 8 years before being targeted for elimination because he'd conducted a classified mission too effectively. Now he was in the hands of people who specialized in making American soldiers disappear permanently. "Agent Morrison," Samantha said, her voice carrying the controlled determination that had sustained her through 5 years of special operations. "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Morrison," looked up from the intelligence reports with the expression of someone prepared for difficult questions about federal capabilities and limitations. The Bureau's investigation has been compromised from the beginning, Samantha continued. Someone inside the federal law enforcement establishment has been providing information to Meridian Defense about our activities, our plans, and our protective protocols. How do I know that this debriefing isn't being monitored by the same people who've been betraying American operations for 7 years? The question hung in the air like an accusation, but Morrison's response carried the weight of someone who'd been asking herself the same question since the investigation began. You don't, Morrison said simply. And neither do I. The penetration of federal agencies by this corruption network is extensive enough that we have to assume any communication could be monitored, any plan could be compromised, and any operation could be sabotaged by people we're supposed to trust. Agent Park looked up from his laptop with the expression of someone who'd discovered information that confirmed their worst suspicions about the scope of infiltration they were facing. I've been analyzing communication patterns from the past 6 months, Park announced. Someone with access to classified federal databases has been providing real-time intelligence about Bureau activities to external parties. The data suggests that at least 3 people inside the FBI's Phoenix office have been compromising our investigation from the beginning. The implications were staggering. Not only had the weapons trafficking conspiracy penetrated the Defense Department and private contractors, but it had infiltrated the federal law enforcement agencies responsible for investigating corruption and protecting national security. Samantha stood and walked to the window overlooking downtown Phoenix, where the city was beginning to wake up to another day of normal civilian life. Somewhere in that urban landscape, federal agents who'd sworn to protect American interests were actively working to destroy anyone who threatened the criminal network that had been betraying American soldiers for years. Agent Morrison, she said without turning around, I need you to understand something about the situation we're facing. The people we're fighting aren't just criminals. They're traitors who've been using American resources to kill American soldiers. Traditional law enforcement approaches aren't going to be sufficient to stop them. Morrison stood and joined Samantha at the window, both women looking out at a city where enemies of the United States were operating under official protection, while American patriots were being systematically eliminated. What are you suggesting? Morrison asked. Samantha turned to face the room full of federal agents who were asking her to trust institutions that had been compromised by the same people who'd murdered her teammates and were currently holding her last surviving colleague captive. I'm suggesting that if we're going to save Sergeant Bradley and stop this conspiracy, we're going to have to operate outside official channels, she said quietly. We're going to have to become the kind of unofficial asset that doesn't exist in government databases and can't be compromised by people with security clearances. The room fell silent as everyone realized that Samantha was proposing to transform their federal investigation into the kind of classified operation that officially never happened, conducted by people who officially didn't exist, against enemies who were protected by official American institutions. How do we do that? Rodriguez asked. Samantha smiled for the first time since the investigation began, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a professional soldier who just realized that the time for following rules had ended, and the time for winning wars had begun. We become ghosts, she said simply, and we hunt them the way they've been hunting us. 6 months later, the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Tucson looked like any other piece of forgotten industrial infrastructure in the Arizona desert. But inside, it had been transformed into a command center that officially didn't exist, operated by people who officially weren't there, conducting operations that officially never happened. Samantha stood before a wall-mounted monitor displaying satellite imagery of a compound in the mountains of northern Mexico, where intelligence indicated that Kevin Bradley was being held by the same criminal network that had been betraying American military operations for 7 years. The facility was heavily fortified, professionally guarded, and located in territory where American law enforcement had no official authority to operate. Agent Morrison, who'd officially resigned from the FBI 3 months earlier to pursue private consulting opportunities, reviewed the assault plan with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent her career planning operations that couldn't afford to fail. The federal investigation had been quietly closed due to insufficient evidence and jurisdictional limitations, but the real work had simply moved underground. Thermal imaging confirms at least 12 guards with military-grade equipment, Morrison announced, manipulating the satellite display to show heat signatures around the compound's perimeter. The facility has been constructed with the kind of defensive capabilities that suggest significant financial resources and professional security consultation. Agent Rodriguez, who'd officially transferred to a desk job in Washington after his injuries at the Phoenix Press Club, studied the tactical approach routes with the focused intensity of someone planning a military assault. His left arm had healed enough to allow full operational capability, but more importantly, he'd brought tactical expertise that had been honed through years of federal law enforcement operations. 2 approach vectors provide adequate cover for infiltration, Rodriguez announced, tracing potential routes on the topographical map. But extraction will be challenging due to the facility's isolated location and the likelihood of heavy resistance once our presence is detected. The team that had assembled in the warehouse represented a unique combination of federal law enforcement experience and special operations capabilities. All of them had officially severed their connections to government agencies, but all of them remained committed to stopping the systematic betrayal of American military personnel by American officials. Agent Park, now working as a freelance cybersecurity consultant, looked up from his array of computer equipment with the expression of someone who just intercepted communications that confirmed their intelligence about the target facility. Latest intercepts confirm that Bradley is alive and being held for interrogation about classified operations conducted by your former unit, Park announced. But they're not just extracting information, they're using him to validate targeting data for ongoing assassination operations against other special operations veterans. The implications were chilling. Kevin Bradley wasn't just a prisoner. He was being forced to provide information that would allow the criminal network to identify and eliminate other soldiers who might pose threats to their activities. Every day he remained in captivity increased the danger to American veterans who'd served in classified operations. Agent Walsh, who'd officially retired from federal service to spend more time with family, entered the warehouse carrying equipment cases that contained specialized gear acquired through channels that didn't appear in any official procurement records. The transition from federal agents to unofficial operatives had required access to resources that couldn't be obtained through legitimate means. Communication intercepts from Dubai indicate that the escaped Meridian Defense executives are coordinating directly with the facility holding Bradley, Walsh announced. They're not just hiding in non-extradition jurisdictions, they're actively managing ongoing criminal operations from their new locations. Samantha studied the intelligence summaries that painted a picture of a criminal enterprise that had successfully evolved beyond the reach of traditional law enforcement. The weapons trafficking network had adapted to federal pressure by moving operations offshore while maintaining domestic assets who continued to compromise American military activities. The facility in Mexico isn't just a detention center, she observed. It's a command and control node for coordinating attacks against American personnel worldwide. Morrison nodded grimly. Our assessment is that eliminating this facility would significantly disrupt their operational capabilities, while allowing us to recover intelligence that could expose the full extent of their domestic infiltration. The plan they developed over the past 3 months was elegant in its simplicity and potentially catastrophic in its implications. A small team of unofficial operatives would conduct a cross-border assault against a fortified facility, extract an American prisoner, and recover intelligence materials that could expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of the American defense establishment. If they succeeded, they might finally stop the systematic betrayal that had been killing American soldiers for years. If they failed, they would disappear into unmarked graves in the Mexican desert, and the criminal network would continue operating with impunity. Final equipment check, Rodriguez announced. Opening cases that contained military-grade weapons, communication systems, and tactical gear that had been acquired through networks that specialized in serving customers who couldn't make purchases. Through official channels, Samantha picked up a rifle that felt like coming home after months of operating in the civilian world. The weight was familiar, balanced, designed for professionals who understood that marksmanship could be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As she conducted her pre-mission inspection, Samantha thought about the journey that had brought her to this warehouse in the Arizona desert. 3 years ago, she'd been Sarah Reynolds, a struggling veteran trying to adapt to civilian life while hiding from enemies who wanted her dead. Tonight, she would become Staff Sergeant Samantha Reyes one final time, conducting the kind of operation that had defined her military career. Communication protocols, Morrison announced, distributing encrypted devices that would allow coordination during the assault. Standard tactical frequencies, emergency extraction signals, and contingency procedures if the mission is compromised. The communication equipment represented technology that was considerably more advanced than standard federal law enforcement gear. Park had acquired systems through contacts in the private intelligence sector, who specialized in serving customers whose operations couldn't be officially acknowledged. Transportation to the target area departs in 30 minutes, Rodriguez announced. Flight time to the Mexican border is 2 hours, followed by ground movement to the assault position. Weather conditions are optimal, and satellite imagery indicates minimal civilian presence in the target area. Samantha loaded her equipment with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd conducted hundreds of similar operations over the course of her military career. Every piece of gear had been selected for specific operational requirements, tested under field conditions, and integrated into a system that would allow her to function effectively in hostile territory. But as she prepared for what might be her final mission, Samantha realized that the most important equipment she carried wasn't technological. It was the knowledge that American soldiers were being betrayed by American officials, that her teammates had been murdered to protect criminal activities, and that Kevin Bradley was currently suffering in captivity because he'd served his country too well. Team leaders, final brief, Morrison announced, gathering everyone around the tactical display for last-minute coordination. Primary objective is prisoner extraction. Secondary objective is intelligence recovery. Tertiary objective is facility destruction to disrupt ongoing criminal operations. The mission parameters were clear, but everyone understood that they were crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Once they conducted military operations in foreign territory without official authorization, they would become the kind of assets that governments disavowed when operations went wrong. Questions? Morrison asked. Samantha looked around the warehouse at federal agents who'd given up their careers to fight a war that their own government couldn't officially acknowledge. All of them had chosen to become ghosts rather than allow the systematic betrayal of American soldiers to continue. No questions, she said quietly. Let's bring Kevin home. They loaded into vehicles that would carry them toward the Mexican border, where American veterans would conduct an unauthorized rescue operation against criminals who'd been protected by American institutions. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. They were becoming the kind of unofficial assets that the criminal network had been trying to eliminate. As they drove through the Arizona desert toward an uncertain fate, Samantha felt the familiar weight of operational responsibility settling on her shoulders. Somewhere in the Mexican mountains, Kevin Bradley was waiting for rescue by teammates who officially didn't exist. Behind them, the criminal network continued selling American weapons to America's enemies while American officials provided protection and intelligence support. The sun was setting over the desert, painting the landscape in shades of red and gold that reminded Samantha of every deployment she'd ever served. Tonight, she would honor the promises that had defined her military career, that American soldiers didn't abandon their own, that some missions were worth any personal cost, and that protecting the innocent sometimes required becoming something the innocent couldn't officially acknowledge. Staff Sergeant Samantha Reyes was no longer just another soldier. She was a ghost, hunting traitors who'd hidden behind American institutions while betraying American lives. And ghosts, she'd learned, were very good at making problems disappear permanently. The war against the people who'd betrayed her country was finally beginning in earnest. And this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.